Hi, this is Kath Gavin. Welcome to part 3 in my 3-part video series on the Feast of Tabernacles. In Matthew 24, Jesus prophesied the Jewish temple being thrown down. Then his disciples asked him, "When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" It's important to note world is from the Greek word aion that can be translated age. Jesus went on to describe great tribulation and the abomination of desolation. "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." Luke 21 adds clarity to this. Verse 20, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains." The Great Tribulation mentioned in Matthew 24 was the Roman-Jewish War that began in 66 AD and ended with the destruction of the Jewish temple and the slaughter of over 1 million Jews by Roman soldiers in 70 AD. In Nisan of 70 AD, Jews gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. This is when the Roman siege began. By the 6th month, Elul, Titus and his army had either slaughtered or taken prisoner those who had not already died of starvation and utterly destroyed the city, including the temple. A first-century historian, Flavius Josephus, witnessed these events and described them as follows. "But when they went in numbers into the lanes of the city with their swords drawn, they slew those whom they overtook without mercy, and set fire to the houses whither the Jews were fled, and burnt every soul in them, and laid waste a great many of the rest. And when they were come to the houses to plunder them, they found in them entire families of dead men, and the upper rooms full of dead corpses, that is, of such as died by the famine. They ran every one through whom they met with, and obstructed the very lanes with their dead bodies, and made the whole city run down with blood, to such a degree indeed that the fire of many of the houses were quenched with these men's blood. And truly so it happened, that though the slayers left off at the evening, yet did the fire greatly prevail in the night. And as all was burning, came the 8th day of the month Gorpius, Elul." The destruction of the Jewish temple marked the end of the Old Covenant age. Matthew 24 verse 34, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." One biblical generation is 40 years. Christ's ministry began in about 30 AD, and 40 years later, the temple was thrown down. When we recognize that the Great Tribulation is not a future event, but a past event that pertained to that generation, all other dispensational beliefs begin to unravel. Matthew 24 verse 29, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." Matthew 24 says that Jesus came in the clouds immediately after the tribulation of those days. Hence he came not at the end of the literal world, but at the end of the Old Covenant age. He came with the sound of a trumpet to gather his elect from the four winds, that he may tabernacle with them for eternity in heaven. This was the resurrection at the last day, mentioned in the Gospel of John, and the resurrection of the dead described by Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. Death is swallowed up in victory. Notice that Paul said, we shall not all sleep. Who was he addressing? Our generation? No. He was addressing the Corinthian church in about 53 to 54 AD. Some of those saints would be alive at the resurrection of the dead. Therefore, they would not go to Sheol and sleep in the dust of the earth when they died. They would go straight to heaven. 1 Thessalonians 4 tells a similar story. Verse 15. We which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. Who was Paul addressing here? Our generation? No. He was addressing the saints in Thessalonica in about 50 to 51 AD. Some of those saints would be alive at the coming of the Lord. In the last chapter of the Gospel of John, Jesus informed Peter that he would eventually be martyred. Indeed, he was crucified under Emperor Nero around 64 AD. Peter, upon hearing this news, looked at John and said, "And what shall this man do?" Jesus replied, "If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me." This is a curious reply, isn't it? Jesus was hinting at the fact that John may be physically alive at his coming. John was one of the few apostles, if not the only apostle, still alive at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Thus he witnessed the coming of the Lord. John, the only person to record Christ's words at the Feast of Tabernacles, also wrote the book of Revelation, in which we see similar imagery. The Gospel of John describes living water flowing from the belly of those who come to Jesus, the source of everlasting life and rest. Revelation 22 describes a pure river of water of life flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. This river is in the midst of a spiritual kingdom called the New Jerusalem. Is it possible that the book of Revelation is not at all futuristic? That it describes the last day of the Old Covenant age, not the end of the literal world? That all 7 feasts, including the Feast of Tabernacles, have already been spiritually fulfilled. Revelation 21, verse 1. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. According to Josephus, the tabernacle of Moses and the second temple were an imitation of the system of the world. The outer court represented the sea, the holy place earth, and the Holy of Holies, and heaven peculiar to God. Thus the temple was heaven and earth to the Jews. In his second epistle, Peter described heaven and earth melting with fervent heat, and said, Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwells righteousness. The old Jerusalem, the first heaven and earth, had to dissolve away before anyone could access the new heavenly Jerusalem, the city not made with hands, that Abraham, Peter, and Paul groaned for. In John 4, Jesus said, the hour comes, and now is, when true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit, not in Jerusalem. From the beginning to the end of Christ's ministry, he preached a spiritual kingdom soon to be established, a kingdom that would replace the physical temple in Jerusalem. Matthew 5 verse 18, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." When the temple passed, every jot and tittle of the law was spiritually fulfilled, including the 7 feasts instituted by God in Leviticus 23. If this were not the case, we should still be observing the feasts, shouldn't we? We should still be dwelling in tents once a year. In conclusion, the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, was the 7th feast celebrated in the 7th month for 7 days and marked the end of the agricultural year. Thus it was sometimes called the Feast of Ingathering. The resurrection of the dead that occurred on the last day of the Old Covenant age was the spiritual ingathering that the 7th feast and final harvest pointed to. If you want to tabernacle with God for eternity, you first have to tabernacle with him in this life. Are you in covenant relationship with God now? Have you said, "I will do to his commandments"? As always, I'd love to read your comments in the comment section below. God bless.